Absolutely. Well, we're so excited to welcome Alex Wilkes on the Adriana Cohen Show on Boston Herald Radio. Alex is a senior vice president with America Rising. Thanks so much for joining us, Alex. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm great, thanks.
How do you pronounce your last name, if I may ask? Is it Wilkes or Wilkes? I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
It's Wilk?
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. You're on air with myself and John Sapichetti. We'd love to get your reaction to the President's State of the Union address. Many people thought he did great. A CNN poll has come out saying 59% of Americans view his speech as very favorable. But we'd love to get your take on it.
Sure. I think that the president did a great job last night. I think that there was something for everyone in that speech. There were things that were sort of traditionally conservative or Republican ideas, but then in some ways the speech was not the kind of speech that you would expect from a typical Republican. So I think that there was, really something for everybody in this speech. There were a lot of unifying themes, and I think that, the Democrats probably walked away a little bit disappointed last night that they didn't have more to sort of rail against.
Right, exactly. Because, it's hard to find fault with so many of his wonderful achievements, like the historically low unemployment for women, Asian Americans, African Americans, or the fact that, President his administration has created 5.3 million new jobs. Alex, what was your reaction to seeing Democrats sit down and not applaud when President Trump was highlighting benefits to both veterans and African Americans?
It was pretty incredible to watch. I think at one point Kirsten Gillibrand, who's running for president now in 2020, she rolled her eyes when the president was talking about the hot economy. And, it's pretty striking to see a politician just so self-absorbed, so excited for, spiking the football, in terms of like a fundraising ploy or some other appeal, that they're willing to insult millions of Americans who have benefited from the economy, who generally feel like the economy is going well, by such childish behavior at the State of the Union. Although I guess we shouldn't be so surprised that, members of Congress are a little self-absorbed.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And what did you make of President Trump bringing up socialism, where that got some of the biggest applause of the night when he said, we are paraphrasing, but, we're born free, we're the land of the free, and we're going to stay that way, and how America is never going to be a socialist country. Of course, that got huge applause by Republicans, but not silence from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Bernie Sanders looked like he was literally scowling during that whole part.
Well, I thought that was great the president brought that up. I think that two recent events have sort of cast, a hard light on some ugly truths that Democrats were trying to conceal for many years. One, the situation down in Venezuela. Two, the recent comments and laws that have been discussed in New York and Virginia with respect to abortion, late-term abortions. Socialism and reproductive justice, as they call it, are nice, sort of euphemisms these days for, equality and choice for everybody. But like I said, that's just not the reality. And so I thought that the fact that these terms and these ideas are sort of coming back in vogue, I think, from, people who sort of misunderstand the history or the facts behind it. It really deserved a nice public shutdown from the president on one of the biggest stages in the country.
Exactly. I mean, all Americans need to do, especially young millennials who unfortunately have not been, taught about the dangers of socialism and the historical context in schools. All you have to do is look to Venezuela. You have Maduro, who has completely destroyed businesses, overtaxed, and the economy is in shambles. I mean, millions of Venezuelans are fleeing the country. They don't even have bread. They don't have food. They don't have even toilet paper. They don't have drinking water. They don't even have the basic necessities. And so there you go. That's a poster for socialism. Alex, you're a millennial. I mean, why isn't this being taught in the American school system?
Well, for millennials, socialism is not what our parents and our grandparents' generation think of it as. Whereas, older generations of Americans see socialism for what it is, which is history's failure. Younger generations of Americans sort of view it like I like to call it Scandinavian socialism. Right. They like to think of it as being equal and fair to people and taking care of people. They sort of have a positive view of it because they think of it as a system that takes care of people. Mm-hmm. But what you don't see is the horrible underside to this ideology where, of course, as Margaret Thatcher famously pointed out, we run out of other people's money to spend, mm-hmm. And it leaves countries in terrible disrepair like Venezuela, mm-hmm. People starving in the streets without mm-hmm. access to quality medical care. So I think that for younger generations, Venezuela is a pretty good, illustrative example of why socialism fails. And, we as conservatives need to be diligent in pointing that out because I think that there's just a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to what socialism really is. And, I'm sure, that's in no small part to liberal academia who kind of wants it that way.
Right. What did you make of the fact of some of the liberal pundits really trashing President Trump's State of the Union speech? So Van Jones was one. He compared the president's speech to, psychotically incoherent. He compared it to cookies and dog poop. I mean, how is creating 5.3 million new jobs for all Americans, and many of which have benefited women and minorities? How is that cookies and dog poop? I mean, come on. And especially this is coming from someone who worked with the Trump administration to sign, criminal justice reform legislation. Don't you think he should be just a little more conciliatory, given the successes we see?
The liberals needed, the knee-jerk reaction is to be anti-Trump, is to be, opposed to anything that comes out of his mouth. And I think that the State of the Union is, they have all this pent-up anger, they have this response, they have the pundits on TV. And, I mean, look, it's within their interest to go out and to say the most negative thing possible. There's no room in American politics anymore for sort of, genuinely appreciating when someone does a good job, when there's a good deed or some kind of, coming together. That doesn't really, the more controversial you can be, the more soundbite happy you can be, unfortunately, is what sort of gains traction and gains popularity. Nobody goes viral for making sense. Right. But, so I think that, with Van Jones and some of the other Democrats' reactions, Stacey Abrams, who gave the response to the Democrats last night, I think we just saw this sort of knee-jerk, automatic reaction, and it wasn't quite where I think most Americans felt. It didn't speak to where the speech had gone, which is in a very sort of centrist place for a lot of Americans, that there was a lot that everyone could get behind, whether it was criminal justice reform or fighting AIDS or childhood cancer. There was just a lot that could be, or the fantastic guests that were there that sort of represent the best about America. There was a lot to sort of enjoy about that speech and to get behind. And I think that the Democrats just sort of went off their rocker because they realized there weren't very many effective arguments against it.
Exactly, especially when he honored our World War II veterans. He honored the young girl Grace, who had just courageously battled cancer while still helping others who were afflicted. That was a beautiful, touching story. Or even the fact that he released Alice Johnson from prison. That was a great story there, that he commuted her sentence because she was, on the wrong end of the criminal justice system. It was, they over-prosecuted her wrongfully. I'm sure race probably had something to do with it. But it's shocking to me how President Trump doesn't get more credit for benefiting the African American community in particular when he's got unemployment at historic lows. He just signed criminal justice reform. He's releasing African Americans who've been wrongfully imprisoned and commuting their sentence. He's doing a lot for that group, and it doesn't seem like he gets that much credit in the media for it.
Look, again, I think it goes back to sort of where we are as a culture and where we are as a political system, that, the sort of conciliatory comedy that you might have between, members of different parties, members of different socioeconomic classes. You just don't really find that anymore because there's, from the standpoint of self-interest, there isn't that much to be gained. And for the Democrats, they have a lot of interest in keeping minority voters solidly in the Democratic column. And so they're not going to be inclined to sort of celebrate different successes that the president might have in reaching out to those communities of color because it doesn't benefit them. And I think it's just, sort of a sad place about where we are in American politics these days.
Absolutely. Alex, given the Democrat candidates who have announced, they're running for president and they're going to challenge Trump, who do you think is the most viable at this point? We know that, former Vice President Joe Biden is still in the wings. He might enter the race and potentially others. But knowing the field right now as it stands with Cory Booker and Kirsten Gillibrand, and Elizabeth Warren is expected to announce her official entree into the election this weekend in Massachusetts, who do you think is the most viable?
Look, I think that all of them have different strengths and weaknesses. I think that the Democrats didn't really do themselves any favors by moving all the way to the left after the 2016 elections, because all of these candidates like Cory Booker and Kamala Harris and Kirsten Gillibrand, Elizabeth Warren, they're all pretty homogenous in terms of their beliefs. Right. There isn't a whole lot to sort of distinguish them. But, I think that it will come down to sort of other soft skills that might be, that might distinguish one from the other. And then, of course, the question is who can get past the Democratic primary, and each of them has their problems. I mean, look, Elizabeth Warren claimed to be a person of color when she in fact wasn't, and there is now very visible glaring proof to that assertion. With Kamala Harris, she has a law enforcement background in California that makes some liberals uncomfortable. With Cory Booker, they accused him of being a little too close to Wall Street. Mm-hmm. With Kirsten Gillibrand, she was a little hawkish on immigration at some point. Mm-hmm. And so, there's a lot to sort of be suspect of in this very, very far left Democratic primary base that might, end up sinking their chances before they ever even get to the general election.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like, every week something new comes out, whether, skeletons from people's past, like today with the news breaking, actually it was yesterday, about Elizabeth Warren claiming Native American status on an application to the Texas bar, on a registration form for the Texas bar. I mean, that just proves that she wasn't being upfront when she said she wasn't trying to, use that status to get ahead in her career. Well, why would you even put it down then? Many people believe, that issue is still not going to go away for Elizabeth Warren. It seems to continue on and on and on. Like she can't get past this. But Alex, we are hitting the clock now, and we just want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And we'd love to welcome you back on sometime soon.
Absolutely, anytime. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you so much. We were just joined by Alex Wilkes. She's with the PAC, conservative PAC, America Rising.